Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I'd review this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And there was a lot of rumblings about the potentiality of the Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford fight happening next, but we didn't really know exactly when it was going to happen or if it was 100% confirmed. And let me give a shout out to the boxing channel, Mr. Boxing Ego. Even though at times I do think that Boxing Ego, that he can have a little bit of political motivations, I do think that Boxing Ego is one of the better boxing analyst channels, and he was one of the guys, he was one of the few guys that stated that don't get your hopes up, at least in terms of this fight being signed off completely, because Canelo Alvarez had never announced it. He had never reposted it, I believe, and there wasn't anything that was ever, as they would say, dried in ink. The contract was not officially signed. Well, Canelo Alvarez has reposted apparently recently Mr. Turkey Al-Shi's claim that him and Canelo Alvarez have worked out a 4-fight deal. Now, who is he potentially going to fight? We'll see. But it's also very possible that the Canelo versus Terrence Bud Crawford fight is going to happen. Of course, there was talks about Canelo possibly fighting a Jake Paul. I think that was Canelo Alvarez's way of stating that if you do not pay me my proper amount, or if you do not pay me what I think that I am owed, then I can just make mega money with Jake Paul, still be one of the main faces of boxing, if not the main face of boxing, and, you can go on without me, because I don't need the Terrence Bud Crawford fight. Crawford and you need me more than I need you guys. At least that's just the way that I see it. And of course, AKHi TV, being the regular Canelo Alvarez hater that he is, and on top of that, the idiot that he regularly is, of course, he ate up right into it with what Eddie Hearn had stated. And of course, he stated that Canelo Alvarez versus Jake Paul was official without anything being official and set in stone. But this is regular AKHi TV, and this is also regular of many other boxing channels where they report news that is not official. And don't get it twisted, there are certain times to where maybe I have stated certain things too if I have a strong suspicion that something is going to happen, but I also don't like stating that anything is official until I see something signed, or I see pretty much from all parties that that fight is official. Now, we don't know who Canelo Alvarez is apparently going to face next, but apparently the two guys that he might be facing in May is either A, going to be Jamal Charlo. Of course, we have heard about William Skull, but apparently the most recent fighters that could be his next fighter, either A, Jamal Charlo. And even though Jamal Charlo, I think, is past his prime, and I think that he's kind of a mentally drained fighter, I still would like to see that fight because, of course, that was a fight that many people wanted a very long time ago. Now, what's very interesting is that many people that they actually made the narrative that Canelo Alvarez avoided Jamal Charlo for a very long time, when actually, in all reality, for those of you that don't know, Jamal Charlo was actually offered a offer many, many years ago against Canelo Alvarez at 160 pounds, I believe, and Jamal Charlo had actually turned that fight down, which I believe would have been his biggest payday. And both Jamal Charlo and Jamal Charlo have testified to that. But these guys like AKHi TV, they won't tell you that. But anyways, let's see what AKHi TV has to say, of course. Overall, of course, he's going to be alleging within this video, about how much of a threat that Crawford is to Canelo. And I mean, Crawford's an all-time great fighter, but of course, this is still a video where AKHi TV is alleging that that Canelo Alvarez is avoiding Terrence Bud Crawford. Even though Canelo Alvarez just recently signed a 4-fight deal with that of Riyadh and apparently that of Turkey Al-Shi, and he ended up reposting it. So it does seem that this is finally official. At least that he's going to be trying to make the Crawford fight. But anyways, let's see what happens. Let's see what AKHi TV, the boxing genius, the boxing wonder, has to say.
Canelo's going back and forth with Turkey, and if that fight is off the table, are you really motivated still by becoming undisputed at 54? And yeah, like what's the biggest motivating goal or fight out there if the Canelo fight just can't happen?
To be honest, that was my motivation. Like, it's crazy.
What's very interesting is that if Canelo Alvarez does not end up fighting that of a Terrence Bud Crawford, apparently what the recent news and what the rumors through the grapevine were was that Turkey Al-Shi is going to try to get Terrence Bud Crawford versus Jerome Boots Ennis. And let me state this, I don't think that Terrence Bud Crawford is going to take that fight. I think that he takes a look at Jerome Boots Ennis as someone that is very particularly dangerous and a little bit too young and fresh for him at this point in time in his career, and that at this current moment in time that he does not offer him enough at that point in time in his career. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not going to state that that's a super bad point from Crawford, because Jerome Boots Ennis right now, he is very young. He's a champion, but he hasn't really beat anybody in his career, so we really don't know how great he actually is. And then on top of that, he's extraordinarily dangerous. And Terrence Bud Crawford has pretty much done everything that he's needed to at the welterweight division. But what's going to be very particularly interesting is because we all know when AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, when they alleged that Canelo was avoiding the best black fighters or the best Mexican fighters, it'll be interesting to see, because they stated that Canelo went up to 168, where apparently all the quote-unquote weak European white boys were. Well, it's interesting because pretty much all the champions at 154 right now are weak European white boys, other than Terrence Bud Crawford, at least, if you want to go by that narrative of all these European champions are just quote-unquote weak European white boys. Now, don't get it twisted. Are there European Caucasian champions that probably, in my view, would not be the best of champions? Yeah, sure. But, I mean, in my personal view, when you take a look at Majimov, for example, he was a decent champion. He just wasn't someone that, in my view, I would say was elite, but he was about an A- level fighter, in my view. But it's just so very particularly interesting. Is Terrence Bud Crawford going to get any criticism for ducking Jaron Butzenis, a fight that would be looked at as a way bigger fight than any of the fights at 154, if Crawford does not end up taking that? I'll be waiting to see if AKHi TV or Dante say that he's ducking Jaron Butzenis, because remember, these guys' narratives are always that black boxers, black American boxers, that they're always the best within boxing, right? So if Crawford wants to really update his legacy, shouldn't he fight Jaron Butzenis instead of Canelo Alvarez or any of the Caucasian champions at 154? Because remember, Caucasian fighters, they're not anywhere near as good, even if they have proven skills, overall as the American black fighters. Even if those guys are great established champions, like that of a Usyk or Inoue or certain guys like that, or other things like that. We all know that Usyk, according to AKHi TV, that he can't be remembered as an all-time great because, remember, there's no great black American fighters at that weight class. Okay, cool. So then, if Terrence Bud Crawford doesn't fight Jaron Butzenis, then it's solved. He's ducking Jaron Butzenis. Isn't that right? But AKHi TV is not going to go off of that narrative.
And it makes me laugh with all the antics that Canelo is doing and saying in the media and whatnot about the size, and he won't get no credit and all this type of things. But Canelo been fighting smaller guys his whole career.
This has been a narrative overall that has been really posted, especially by the LDBC and new media, that Canelo Alvarez has been fighting quote-unquote smaller guys for his whole career. What I'll state is this. When Canelo Alvarez was at 154, he clearly was a little bit larger than some of those guys, like a Matthew Hatton when he had fought them. Of course, he was definitely larger than Josesito Lopez, because that fight really wasn't ever actually supposed to happen in the first place. For those of you that actually know and go that far back, it wasn't supposed to be Canelo Alvarez versus Josesito Lopez. It was really supposed to be Victor Ortiz versus Canelo Alvarez. And Victor Ortiz, to be honest with you, is a huge welterweight. He's really a guy that's supposed to be more of a 154-pounder. But Josesito Lopez ended up upsetting the apple cart, and he ended up breaking Victor Ortiz's jaw. So that fight, of course, was eventually squandered. Victor Ortiz, of course, will later on say that De La Hoya protected, Canelo, all this sort of stuff. I mean, I don't know. To be fair, I don't know what happened back then. But what I do know was that that fight was supposed to happen at that current moment in time. And that fight would have been very, very big. But Victor Ortiz, in regular-like fashion, fucked that fight up. So it is what it is. But anyways, then of course he fought Josesito Lopez, who of course clearly was outmatched, both in skill and on top of that in size. But then of course after that, I believe he had fought Austin Trout, who was the same size as Canelo. Then of course he would go on to fight Lara, who was the same size around. Then of course he would go on to fight Cotto, who was a little bit smaller, but a middleweight champion, someone who was established more at 154 and at 160. And then of course later on he would go on to fight Amir Khan. That would probably be the last guy that Canelo Alvarez would fight that was significantly smaller than him, at least in terms of weight. Now, of course, certain people may bring up Jermell Charlo. Listen, I've stated this about the Charlo brothers for a very long time. Even though, of course, you have to give Jermell Charlo a little bit of credit for moving up 2 weight classes. And, of course, that's a little bit of an advantage because Canelo, of course, he's adjusted to 160 and 168, and Jermell Charlo was not. Both of those fighters are really natural middleweight fighters. Canelo Alvarez is not really a natural 168-pounder. And Jermell Charlo, he's definitely not no damn natural 154-pounder. The dude is like 6 foot and a guy that can rehydrate to 175 plus. The dude is really a complete weight bully at that weight class. It just is what it is. Both the Charlo brothers have pretty much been weight bullies for their whole entire career. All right, I mean, at least with Canelo, even though he rehydrates a bit heavier, at least you can say he's like 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach. Jermell Charlo and Jamal Charlo, they rehydrate probably just as heavy as Canelo if you really let them. And then on top of that, like they're both 6 foot with a 74-inch arm reach. Like, are you kidding me? And you're fighting guys at 154 and at 160?
Been making his own catch weight for years.
So what that fight was very similar. Like, that fight was a little bit like a Floyd Mayweather versus a Juan Manuel Marquez type of match, where he moved up Marquez 2 weight classes, but Marquez and Floyd were really more similar in size than what it was really led on, because Floyd is not really a natural welterweight.
You know, Canelo fought a smaller Mayweather. Canelo fought a smaller Amir, not Amir Khan, but Amir Khan.
Yeah, he did at 155. Yeah,
Amir Khan. You know.
Now, of course, people are saying, well, he fought a smaller Mayweather, right? But Mayweather was pretty much looked at as the meal ticket for anybody within that era. That was the #1 pound-for-pound fight for anybody that potentially could have got that fight from anywhere from 140 all the way up to 154. So many different people really wanted that fight. Terrence Bud Crawford is looked at as debatably the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, but he's not looked at on the same level as how a Mayweather was, say, when Canelo Alvarez had fought him. If Canelo Alvarez had been able to beat that of a Floyd Mayweather Jr., it would have been a passing of the torch, overall to basically the new guy that they really wanted to promote in Canelo, pretty much very similar to the way that Oscar was able to beat Pernell Whitaker or able to beat Julio Cesar Chavez. That's the way that they really wanted to try and promote it. A guy that was debatably the #1 pound-for-pound guy against a new up-and-coming guy that had a lot of potential. No one takes a look at this fight that is similar, at least anyone with any actual boxing IQ. No one actually takes a look at this fight that is similar to the Mayweather versus Canelo situation, because Crawford has never even been at 160 pounds before. This fight would take place at 168. Canelo is not coming down for you, dude. So the thing is that Mayweather, sure, he was smaller than Canelo, of course. But, at the end of the day, Floyd Mayweather Jr. had won multiple belts at the 154-pound weight class before. And he was fighting at 147, which was only a weight class below. So that was still a fight that was very viable at the time. And there was really only one weight class difference. Now, of course, was Canelo 15 pounds bigger than, Floyd Mayweather Jr. on Fight Night? Yes, of course. But at least Floyd Mayweather Jr. was a guy that had adjusted very well to 147 and had fought a few fights at 154 before. Crawford has just had one fight at 154. And then on top of that, you weren't really super duper impressive in your last fight against Israel Madrimov in your last performance. And then on top of that, once again, you've never fought at 160 or 168. And you have all these idiots out here saying like, oh, well, Canelo fought Floyd Mayweather. Dude, it's a completely different circumstance. Like, you have so many of these idiots that think that it's a similar circumstance. It's not a similar circumstance whatsoever.
He fought Jamel Charlo, and I'm pretty sure
Jamel Charlo is way bigger than you, by the way. Jamel Charlo really should be fighting at 160 pounds. If Jamel Charlo fought at Yanabek at 160, he would get washed. Jamel Charlo is good, but I remember when all these LDBC and new media guys are claiming oh, Jamel Charlo's not getting the credit that he deserves because he's a black fighter. No, it's because they realize that Jamel Charlo really is not a guy that is a super elite level fighter. I'm sorry, but you lost to Tony fucking Harrison. Give me a break.
He didn't make as much money with all those guys except Mayweather. Even Berlanga right now that he will with me. But yet and still, he
Crawford is so desperate for this fight, man. And I like Crawford a lot, man. And listen, I don't necessarily blame him for wanting the fight because I think that he realizes that this is going to take his legacy to a whole new level if he's actually able to beat Canelo Alvarez. But the thing is Crawford keeps trying to say all this shit about, well, I don't know if I'm chasing Canelo Alvarez, but it's a fight that I want. Crawford, this is the main fight that you want. And let's keep it a buck, bro. If you don't get this fight, you're going to think about retirement. Stop bullshitting.
All these excuses why he don't want to take a fight with me. If it's all about business, then you doing good business. If I'm easy work, I heard him say I'm easy work. If I was easy work, Well,
I'm not really sure if Canelo Alvarez said that. I think what he stated is that if he beats you, that he's not going to get any credit. And most people are probably not going to give Canelo that much credit. You have people out there saying that, oh, Canelo's ducking Terrence Bud Crawford because he knows that he can beat him. Well, let me just ask you something. If Canelo beats Terrence Bud Crawford, which is something that more than likely would end up happening because of the combined skills and size, what is going to happen? Who is the win greater for? Is it greater for Canelo or is it greater for Crawford? Or is it someone on an even playing field? When you take a look at Mayweather and Pacquiao, for example, that's a fight to where whoever ends up winning that fight, they're pretty much going to get even credit going either way. Now, of course, with Canelo and Jermell Charlo, of course, more credit was going to go to Jermell Charlo had he won that fight. But at least Jermell Charlo was somewhat sizable with Canelo. Like Crawford, I mean, he's a guy that, of course, is a little bit lengthier and a little bit taller. But he's a guy that, in terms of weight, he's not comparable with Canelo. Jermell Charlo, both the Charlo brothers are comparable with Canelo, if not even a bit bigger than Canelo Alvarez in certain, physical dimensions. It's not the same with Terence Bud Crawford. So like I said, you have this fight, but it's like, dude, like, come on. Like, no one's going to take a look at this fight if Canelo takes a look at it and says, oh, man, can you believe Canelo beat Crawford? He's top 10 of all time. Like, no one's going to take a look at it like that. That's why Crawford has no problem with this fight, but he won't take the Jaron Boots-Ennis fight because he realizes that Jaron Boots-Ennis is, is a guy that is a huge threat, but isn't that much of a reward, at least for him at this point. Canelo, he brings all the reward, and then on top of that, like, who's going to really criticize Terence Bud Crawford if he really loses this fight? Who's really going to say, oh, man, like, you're overrated, or like, we're not as good as you thought you were because, you lost to Canelo Alvarez? No one's going to say that. Once again, you have all the excuses in the world if you lose, but then if you win, you're on top of the world. It's a win-win situation for you. So the way that Canelo looks at it is like, dude, if you want me to take this fucking fight, you got to put something in it for me. Because it's not just enough, to say this quote-unquote legacy bullshit, because I know what time it is. Like, don't sit here and try to feed me this bullshit about, oh, Canelo, like, people remember you as the greatest of your generation. Like, come on. Canelo's smarter than that.
You would take all that money that he's offering you. But yet, and still, he want $200 million for Benavidez, and he want $150 million to fight me. So that just lets me know right there that I'm a threat to him.
Or that he wants to be paid what he personally thinks that he's owed, and on top of that, with the fight that really, in all honesty, doesn't bring him anywhere near as much in terms of legacy as what it does you. It just is what it is. Crawford can bitch all he wants to, but I mean, once again, is he going to fight Jaron Boots-Ennis in his next fight? If Canelo Alvarez said, okay, you know what, Terence Bud Crawford, you can fight me, but in your next fight, you have to fight, you have to fight Janibek in your next fight, to secure that fight. Terence Bud Crawford would turn the fight down, so once again, Crawford, is taking a part of this fight. Don't get it twisted, because I think he realizes that it's great for his legacy, but he also realizes that there's no other, major traps that he has to go through in order to get to Canelo Alvarez. The hallway's wide open. And if he loses, once again, he's not going to get, any, any people that really that really say that, you lost, so overall you're not as good as what we thought you were. Because once again, he's just going to get the size excuse.
I'm a threat to him. I'm a threat to his legacy, because it would be crazy for a guy that started at 135 to come all the way up to 168, your weight, no catch weight, no none of that, and dethrone you. So, he got that in the back of his head. This guy.
And let me tell you what, I'm sure that Canelo Alvarez, to a degree, does have that in the back of his head to a certain degree. Because at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez is looking at it, because Canelo's a relatively smart dude. He's taking a look at it and he's saying, if I win this fight, people are just going to say that I beat a guy that was coming up 2 or 3 weight classes, and a guy that is probably about a natural welterweight. But if I end up losing this fight, then my legacy is pretty much completely tarnished, or it's at least very tainted compared to what it used to be. So what the fuck is really in it for me, at least unless I'm getting a major payday? Now, I think that Canelo Alvarez can somewhat spin it, overall, and say that, well, this is very comparable to Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler, or this was like when I fought Mayweather. I don't think as many people are going to buy it. Maybe you can convince them of the Sugar Ray Leonard versus Hagler thing, because to me, that's kind of what this fight is.
For one, he's tough. For two, he's a boxer. He moves. He can punch. He can do it all. I can't slip up and lose to this little guy.
And that's Terence Bud Crawford saying that right there. You have so many of these dumbass LDBC and new media channels that say all this stuff about, like, oh, Canelo's just an average boxer. Even Terence Bud Crawford just recently told you that he can do it all. Terence Bud Crawford, once again, I keep telling people, he knows what a Canelo Alvarez fight or win would do for his legacy. And he has no problem taking the Canelo Alvarez fight, because there's nothing for him to lose. He's going to get a major payday, the biggest payday of his career. And then on top of that, Terence Bud Crawford, once again, if he loses, he's just going to get the size excuse. So there's no legacy points lost off of this whatsoever. But like I said, tell Terence Bud Crawford, once again, if Canelo Alvarez, once again, if he said, hey, Terence, you get the fight with me, but in order for this fight to happen, I want you to beat Janibek, 160 pounds. So this fight, is actually somewhat plausible. Terence Bud Crawford would say, fuck no. There's no way that I'm doing that. You know why? Because once again, Terrence Bud Crawford realizes that Canelo Alvarez overall, that's pretty much his way into legacy. But if he had to actually fight someone that was bigger than him, someone that didn't bring as much legacy or someone that didn't bring as much money to the table, he wouldn't be fighting him.
And what will my fans think of me? What will my Mexican people think of me? So, it's a big risk for him. Like he said, he don't get nothing out of it, but he does get a lot of it out of it. Nothing.
The only way that Canelo Alvarez gets something major out of fighting you, Terrence Bud Crawford, is first of all, if you won the belt at 154 at 160, would you finally won a belt at 154? But then on top of that, also if he gets a major payday. And I think that's pretty much what Canelo Alvarez was saying without a Turki Al-Ashi. Canelo knows how to negotiate. And he'll, I have a feeling that Turki was saying that, we're going to pay you this much. And Canelo said, no, I want more than that. And Turki was saying that, oh, well, you're pricing yourself. And Canelo said, okay, no problem. Well, you know what? Jake Paul, he's looked at as one of the bigger stars right now within the boxing scene. And then on top of that, he's making certain pay-per-view numbers. A lot of people have been talking about me versus Jake Paul. I'm just going to go fight Jake Paul and make $200 million. And then let's see overall if you make up your mind by then.
Those guys was pound for pound best fighter in the world that he fought when it was coming up in weight.
Well, Jermell Charlo by a certain amount of people was looked at as top 10 pound per pound. He would have not been on my top 10 pound per pound list personally, but he would have been within my top 20 pound per pound. And once again, you ask these LDBC and new media channels, Champside even had Jermell Charlo as the #1 pound per pound fighter. Which once again just shows you how overrated Jermell Charlo's skill set was by some of these channels. Like, are you fucking kidding me? The #1 pound per pound fighter, and at his tenure at 154, he lost his titles to Tony fucking Harrison. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what a joke.
One of those guys, he wasn't getting the amount of money through it.
And let me also state this, because every time I bring up that Jermell Charlo situation, I always get some dude in here that tries to compare it to the Lomachenko situation, and you're like, oh, well, Lomachenko was ranked #1 pound for pound, and he lost to Orlando Salido. Right, but that's a completely different situation. You want to know why that's a completely different situation? Because Lomachenko lost to Orlando Salido in the second fight of his professional career before he had ever even won a belt before. It was a second professional fight. He was expected to do a lot more at the beginning of his career than what a Jermell Charlo ever was because he had such a great amateur pedigree. But it was always known that it was going to be a little bit different in professional boxing, and we still had to see him grow as a fighter. But after the Salido fight, then he racked up wins against Gary Russell. He racked up wins over Nicholas Walters, Guillermo Rigondeaux, and Jorge Linares, and, other fighters like that. That's eventually when he would become the #1 pound per pound fighter. Not losing to Orlando Salido after he got some of the bigger wins in his career and becoming a champion, then beating a couple of other guys that weren't on his level, and then he's debated within the top 5 by some of these channels. That's not what happened.
Him guaranteed for those guys that he's getting with me.
Jermell Charlo, who lost to Tony Harrison, by the way, who was never a champion before he ended up beating him. Now, that being stated, Jermell Charlo is still, in my view, an A- level fighter and an A- level win for Canelo. But like I already told people before, Jermell Charlo was never a top 5 pound per pound fighter. Like, I'm sorry, you can never convince me of that. It is what it is. Like, you have these fucking idiots like AKHi TV saying that Lomachenko was so overrated because he lost to Salido. Right, so are we going to talk about how Jermell Charlo lost to Tony Harrison, a dude that was known for getting knocked out in every big fight in his career before he ended up beating Jermell Charlo and getting him a hell of a time in a rematch? Now, listen, Tony Harrison is a relatively talented fighter, but there was no way he was supposed to beat Jermell Charlo if Jermell Charlo was truly a top 5 pound per pound fighter. Because not even like Jermell Charlo was moving up in weight. Jermell Charlo was fucking bigger than everybody there. Like, that's why I say, man. Like, you have so many of these guys, they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about whatsoever.
So it just goes to show, the level of respect. I look at it as respect that he give me. I don't look at it as disrespect. I look at it as the level of respect that he think of me as a fighter.
If you've been in a car accident, don't call an attorney. Use this AI app instead.
You want to close more deals as soon as next week, possibly? Now, when I say more deals, here's what
that, he think of me as a fighter.
That was the pound-for-pound king, Terrence Bud Crawford, giving his reaction to Canelo Alvarez, only willing to fight him for $150 million. With that same breath, he said, he wanted $150 million to $200 million to fight David Benavidez.
Keep in mind that this dude right here, Mr. AKHi TV, this is the same idiot that claimed that Canelo Alvarez, that he had officially announced that Jake Paul was fighting next, and it was never officially announced by Canelo Alvarez himself. That's why you always have to wait for the source himself, because now this dude looks like a complete moron, which he always has been. But I mean, anyway.
Because he only brings 25 pounds more. Mind you, Edgar Berlanga brought 25 pounds more on fight night. But Canelo didn't want nowhere close to even $50 million to fight Edgar Berlanga.
And listen, I'll agree with that point. It's very obvious that Canelo Alvarez, and listen, I know that a certain amount of his fans may come in my comment section and they may say, oh, well, David Benavidez, he didn't activate his mandatory position. Listen, at the end of the day, David Benavidez was there for about 3 years. And Canelo Alvarez, I never seen him once try to really make the fight with David Benavidez. Now, listen, what I'll state is this. Do I believe that David Benavidez is a weight bully for that weight class? Yes. Do I believe that he's more of a natural light heavyweight fighter? Yes. But at the end of the day, if that guy is at that weight class, and if you want to claim yourself to be the #1 pound-for-pound guy, and if that's the fight that everybody's asking for, then if you decide not to take that fight, you're going to have to deal with the criticism. It is obvious that Canelo Alvarez, that he knew the threat that Benavidez was because of his combined skill set, but also especially with the size and the power that he had. It just is what it is.
To make matters worse, even though Crawford brings 25 pounds less than Canelo, Canelo still wants $150 million to fight Crawford.
Canelo Alvarez is at the end of his career. And Canelo Alvarez is pretty much doing what Miguel Cotto did. He's pretty much doing what Mayweather did. He's pretty much doing what some of these other guys did. Canelo was basically like, look, I've given you guys all these fights for many, many years. At the end of the day, I'm going to dictate my career at this current moment in time the way that I want it. Now, do I like the way that Canelo Alvarez went about the David Benavidez situation? No. But at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez has still been fighting somewhat of decent contenders like Jermell Charlo and Jaime Munguia. He's still been putting on some relatively good fights. But the fights that I would actually love to see Canelo win, I would love to see him fight Janibek. I wouldn't mind the Jermell Charlo fight. I'm just not quite really sure if Jermell Charlo is anywhere near the same fighter that he once was. And I don't even think that the absolute best version of Jermell Charlo would have ever beaten Canelo Alvarez. But I mean, right now, he looks like a completely soulless fighter. Like, he looks like he has nothing left in his heart and his soul for boxing. He's completely done ever since his divorce. But I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. But I would love to see Janibek, maybe Jermell Charlo. I wouldn't mind the Crawford fight, but we'll see. But another fight that I would actually also really love to see would be Canelo Alvarez versus Diego Pacheco. Or, whatever the hell that dude's name is. The very tall and lengthy Mexican fighter that recently defeated Steve Nelson, one of Crawford's boys. I'd love to see that fight.
The oldest excuse in the book to duck is to overprice yourself. And that's how much Canelo Alvarez fears Crawford. That's right. Canelo is not only ducking Benavidez, he's ducking Crawford as well. This man is terrified of Bivol rematch, of Beterbiev, of Benavidez, and also the pound-for-pound king, Terrence Bud Crawford.
Right, but listen to the level of standards that you're also giving Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez is a guy that's at 168, and he really doesn't even fully belong there. Canelo Alvarez stepped at 175, and he wasn't really ever supposed to be there in the first place. Those guys like Artur Beterbiev and Dimitri Bivol, dude, those are guys that are 6 foot and over. And on top of that, they can rehydrate somewhere to around 200 pounds. Not saying that's what Dimitri Bivol did necessarily, but some of those guys can. So the point is that Canelo was not ever supposed to be there in the first place. He's already outsized at 168 pounds. If you took a look at his fight against Jaime Munguia and Edgar Berlanga, like, those guys were fucking huge compared to Canelo Alvarez. Even a guy like Callum Smith and even Caleb Plant, they were bigger than Canelo Alvarez. So when he goes up a weight class to where they're even a little bit bigger, like, I don't understand how you can really logically say, unless you're a complete hater, that Canelo Alvarez is actually avoiding Beterbiev and avoiding that, overall of, what's his name, a Dimitri Bivol rematch. Like, dude, it wouldn't make any sense for Canelo to take that rematch, especially at 168 pounds, because they're not the same size. Like, that would be like me, Terrence Bud Crawford. Like, if I was trying to hate on Crawford, and I was trying to say this shit about, oh, well, Crawford, he claims that he wants to be so great. Why doesn't he fight Janibek? He's ducking Janibek. Like, come on, man. Like, I mean, we know that Canelo won a title there before, but come on, like, he's not really supposed to be there. Like, that was when Oscar De La Hoya, was at 160 pounds, and he clearly was outsized against Bernard Hopkins. And the one title that Oscar De La Hoya did win there over Felix Sturm, he really wasn't supposed to fucking win that fight anyway. Or maybe it was Felix Sturm. I can't remember. Whatever, the German fighter. But, that's pretty much like, oh, well, Oscar De La Hoya, he's ducking Jermaine Taylor. Like, come on.
Who has to move up pretty much 3 weight classes to fight him. The funny thing about it, Canelo said, oh, Crawford is easy money. And he was criticizing Crawford for the Madrimov fight. But as you guys heard what Crawford told Canelo, how you gonna criticize my performance when you couldn't do what I did? When you moved up to your 4th weight class, you lost.
Right. I'm glad that we have this conversation. Now that we're talking about 4th weight classes and we're just comparing every 4th weight class like it's exactly the same with no context and no information and no details whatsoever. I'm very glad that we're addressing this, Mr. AKHi TV. So then what you're really stating is that Naoya Inoue is really the best fighter, the most dominant fighter, and the most skilled fighter in the world. That's what you're really saying. You're saying that Naoya Inoue is really the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Because when Inoue fought Stephen Coolboy Fulton, that was his 4th weight class. And he went up there immediately, fought the best guy in the world there. A guy that, remember, all these guys said that Fulton was top 10 pound for pound. Inoue completely trashed him. Overall, had a spotless performance, knocked him out within 8 rounds. When Crawford moved up at his 4th weight class, he had a 7 rounds to 5 fight over a guy that just became a champion because the title was vacated, and a guy that had 12 total pro fights. I'm very glad that we had this conversation, and I'm very glad that now you would have to allege that Inoue is the #1 pound for pound fighter, if we're not going to have any context about the size or the different weights in any way whatsoever. Like, give me a fucking break. When Canelo Alvarez was against Dimitri Bivol, he was fighting a 6-foot guy that was a light heavyweight A+ level talent. When Terrence Bud Crawford moved up to 154, he was taller and lengthier by Israel Madrimov by 5 inches in terms of his reach. And on top of that, Israel Madrimov just became a champion and was a guy that had beat literally nobody in his career and was a guy that had 12 total fights. Like, give me a fucking break.
Obviously, Bivol, where Canelo got whooped every single round. Meanwhile, when Crawford moved up to his 4th weight class to fight Bivol teammate Madrimov, Crawford clearly beat him.
Good. So once again, start putting Inoue above Terrence Bud Crawford. Because Terrence Bud Crawford was your #1 pound-for-pound fighter for so long because of his alleged dominance. So then let's put Inoue as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Like I had once again this person, TBE Boxing, that came in my comment section a multitude of times. And he was saying that, well, you're saying that Canelo's better defensively over Crawford, but the stats don't show that. The stats do this and this and this. Right, but once again, no offense against Crawford, but other than Postal, Madrimov, Spence, Porter, and Gamboa, who the fuck has that man ever really fought in his career? And I've watched Terrence Bud Crawford's whole entire career. You're not going to sit here and tell me that Ricky Burns, Raimundo Beltran, Julius Ndongo, Felix Diaz, Hank Lundy, John Molina Jr., you're not going to tell me that Jeff Horn and Aegis Kavalauskas and Jose Benavidez, Derry Jean, you're not going to, a washed-up Kell Brook and a washed-up Amir Khan, you're not going to tell me that all these fucking guys are A-grade level fighters. Like, come on. Like, just stop.
So you can't criticize someone when you fail to do the same thing. Crawford won. Canelo.
Right, but they're not under the same circumstances at all, AKHi TV, and you know that. Like, come on, man.
Lost. Simple and plain. If Canelo said Crawford is easy money, then show us. Take that easy money of your biggest payday that Turkey is offering.
Right, and how much credit are you going to give Canelo Alvarez, really, AKHi TV? Because you don't even give Canelo credit for beating guys like a Caleb Plant or guys, like a Gennady Golovkin. AKHi comes up with an excuse every time Canelo Alvarez beats someone like that. So how much credit is AKHi TV going to give Canelo for beating Crawford? He's not going to give him any credit whatsoever. And that's why Canelo Alvarez is also a little bit reluctant to take this fight, because he knows, what a lot of the Crawford fan base or what a certain amount of these guys are like. They see the reason why AKHi TV and Dante's Boxing Nation, the reason why they want this fight to happen so bad is because this is really the perfect fight. They can't lose in this situation. Just like Terrence Bud Crawford can't lose in this situation, they also can't lose in this situation. They're going to talk all this shit before the fight about how Canelo Alvarez is this average boxer and, it's a 50 level fight. And, oh my God, can you believe that it's a 50 level fight? Then if Canelo Alvarez goes in there, whoops his ass for 12 rounds or knocks him out, then they're just going to say, oh, well, Canelo Alvarez, the size, was just way, way, way too much. Pretty much the same shit that they said with Jamel Charlo. Remember they were talking all this shit. Dante was talking all this shit about how Brian Gastano may potentially give Jamel Charlo a tougher fight than Canelo Alvarez. Then he gets in there against Jamel Charlo, completely whoops his ass from pillar to post or dominates him for all 12 rounds. And all Dante says is that Canelo had a massive size advantage. Like, come on.
To fight Crawford. What's the problem? It ain't like Canelo never fought anyone smaller than him. In fact, it's the contrary. Canelo is notoriously known for fighting mostly fighters who are smaller than him. He made many fighters move up multiple weight classes, from Amir Khan, Jamel Charlo, Josecito Lopez, Munguia, Floyd Mayweather.
Jaime Munguia, bro. He made Jaime Munguia move up multiple weight classes. Actually, no, that's not correct. Jaime Munguia had been fighting at the 160-pound weight class for a very long time, and then he actually had 1 or 2 fights at the 168-pound weight class before he fought Canelo. Remember, he knocked out John Ryder. So this dude doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about.
Ricky Hatton brother, and the list goes on and on and on. I guess since Canelo will never be the best at anything in boxing, except of obviously ducking, cherry picking, and
this dude is the biggest hater of Canelo Alvarez that I've ever personally seen.
Taking PEDs.
At Harbor Freight, we do business differently from the other guys. We design and test our own tools.
Strength training, now at a new level. Gym Monster 2 is an all-in-one...
PEDs. Canelo has turned his attention to the YouTube boxing. He wants to become the pound-for-pound #1 YouTuber. Since he can't become the #1 pound-for-pound boxer, I mean, forget about Canelo dreaming about being pound-for-pound #1 over the pound-for-pound king Terrence Bud Crawford.
Canelo Alvarez already was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter once upon a time. Now, I don't think that he was, overall, at least in terms of right now. I mean, excuse me, not that he was. I don't think that he is right now. But he definitely was, about a few years ago when he had unified the 168-pound weight class. And then on top of that, was also able to win one title at 175. You had to acquiesce that Canelo at that time was the pound-for-pound #1 then. But of course, if you listen to AKHi TV, Crawford was #1 pound-for-pound because he was so dominant over these bums like Aegis Kavaliauskas and Jose Benavidez. Like, for those of you that remember those few years ago, like AKHi TV and Dante, they would try to gas up to every Terrence Bud Crawford win, even though they were over complete bums of the month, like Aegis Kavaliauskas and Jose Benavidez. Guys that were undefeated, but guys that were never going to become a champion over any legitimate talents. Like, those guys were not going to be guys like Sean Porter or Danny Garcia, let alone Keith Thurman or Kell Brook or, those guys at their best. But of course, Kell Brook at that time, he pretty much was done. Kell Brook wasn't ever the same after Errol Spence defeated him.
Canelo is not even the best fighter in his own weight class. When he was at 168, guess what? Benavidez and Morrell were the best 2 fighters in that weight class, and Canelo ducked Benavidez for over 5 years. So that tells you everything you need to know about Canelo. Each time Saul Canelo Alvarez went to a certain weight class, he ducked the best competition.
No, he didn't. When he was at 154, once again, he fought Trout, he fought Laura. He fought those guys, all right? Is what it is. Then when he went to 160, he fought Golovkin, he fought Danny Jacobs. Now, he did not fight Jamal Charlo or Andrade. He did kind of avoid the Demetrius Andrade fight. But to be honest, I don't really blame Canelo that much because who the fuck wants to fight a guy that is relatively dangerous in Andrade? But then on top of that, you're not really going to get, much in terms of fighting him. Like, he's a guy that not a whole lot of people know, at least mainstream-wise. And then on top of that, like, you could probably get just as much credit as for defeating Andrade as someone like a Caleb Plant. And this is just my view. Caleb Plant and Andrade are really on the same level. I don't give a shit what anybody says. No offense. But if Andrade was really that much better than someone like a Caleb Plant, he would have proved it against David Benavidez. Is what it is.
When Canelo was at 154.
And then, of course, at 168, he fought Callum Smith, Billy Joe Saunders, and also Caleb Plant. Keep in mind, remember that AKHi TV is the same snake that claimed that Canelo Alvarez was going to avoid Caleb Plant. Then when that fight happened, they just claimed that Caleb Plant was another weak European white boy. exactly what happened.
He was at 168. Guess what? Benavidez and Morrell were the best two fighters in that weight class, and Canelo ducked Benavidez for over 5 years.
Well, I think that Canelo Alvarez does deserve some criticism for avoiding the David Benavidez fight, but I can't really get after him too much for avoiding the David Morrell fight, because I mean, at the end of the day, the man only had 11 total fights. He had less fights even then, than what he did now. So I mean, obviously, but I mean, the thing is like, I can't really get after Canelo Alvarez for not fighting David Morrell. I do get after him for not fighting Benavidez, because Benavidez was a mandatory, and then on top of that, he made it very hard in order for that fight to happen. And yes, Benavidez is kind of a weight bully there, I agree. But, Benavidez is a guy that, in my personal view, he was the main guy that everyone wanted to see. Canelo had all the titles, so Benavidez wanted to be a champion there again. Canelo should have fought him.
So that tells you everything you need to know about Canelo. Each time Saul Canelo Alvarez went to a certain weight class, he ducked the best competition.
No, he didn't. But this is the narrative that AKHi TV is going to try to use. And the reason why he wants to use this is so he can allege that Canelo Alvarez never was the best in any particular weight class. This is the bullshit excuse they always try to use. Other than Mayweather, Canelo Alvarez was the best 154-pounder. All right, when Mayweather left the division, Canelo then returned to being the best 154-pounder in the world. He beat guys like Austin Trout. He beat Araceli Lara. All right, so he beat the two best guys there. By the way, a guy that both Andrade and the Charlo brothers ended up avoiding, and Araceli Lara, by the way. But it is what it is. But Canelo was the only one that had fought him. Then at 160, he fought Gennady Golovkin, a guy that was looked at as the best guy there. He also fought Danny Jacobs, who was looked at as another, great guy there. And then he, I believe, was trying to set up a fight with Jermall Charlo, and Jermall Charlo turned the fight down, by the way. For those of you that don't know, a lot of that doesn't get mentioned, but both Jermall Charlo and Jermall Charlo have actually stated that at one point in time that Jermall Charlo had turned that fight down.
When Canelo was at 154, he ducked all of the champions for years, and that was the Charlo brothers and Andrade. When he moved up to 160, he ducked Andrade again.
Andrade would become a champion, I believe, a little bit later on, but the Charlo brothers would not really become a champion until Canelo Alvarez would really leave that division. So, I mean, it is what it is. And the Charlo brothers were not really established champions, or they weren't really established as super great fighters, at least until a little bit later on. And like I said, Canelo Alvarez, he eventually would try to fight with both Charlo brothers. Jermall Charlo turned the fight down, and he fought Jermall Charlo. Remember all this shit about Jermall Charlo being top 5 pound per pound, and that, all this shit they were talking. Then the fight ends up happening, and they just use the size excuse anyway. Like, come on.
Not for one belt this time, but for all of the belts. For undisputed, after he said he wants to be undisputed, that's his dream, is to become the first Mexican undisputed champion in the middleweight division. Well, he ducked Andrade for that, for his big...
And I do also believe that he avoided the Andrade fight, but I can't really get after Canelo Alvarez too much for that. Andrade, and, there are just certain fighters that are like that. They're very extremely, and to be quite honest with you, Andrade was actually in a very similar situation at 160 pounds, where Andrade, he was faced with either moving up to 168, taking certain fights that he would get either just as much credit for or more credit for at 168 by fighting either Canelo or Benavidez when it came down to it, when he could have stayed at 160 and fought a Janabek. He defended his title like several times against a whole bunch of bums at 160 pounds, but then when Janabek wanted to fight him, he didn't fight him. Now, I'm not going to say that he ducked Janabek necessarily, because I think that, the 168-pound weight class, it was, probably the better weight class with Canelo and Benavidez in there. And had he beat Benavidez, it would have put that much more pressure on Canelo to fight Andrade. I get it. But at the end of the day, Andrade was in a similar situation. Andrade was looking at, like, why the fuck would I want to fight this dude? Because he could have stayed at 160 and made a super fight with Janabek, but he didn't decide to. Instead, he took the route at 168 where he would have had the excuse against Benavidez that he just moved up and that Benavidez was bigger than him. So I mean, it just is what it is. Sometimes there are fighters that, they're a little bit too risky for the amount of reward that they're going to get. Andrade is one of those fighters. Janabek is one of those fighters. Golovkin for a while was one of those fighters. Lara and Rigondeaux were one of those fighters. They were, two of those fighters.
Payday at that time, too. Canelo Alvarez is without a doubt the GOAT of ducking, to the point they created a belt.
No, the GOAT of ducking is Gervonta Tank Davis. That's who the GOAT of ducking is. Him and Mikey Garcia.
A duck belt for Canelo Alvarez to allow him to continue maneuvering and ducking. That was the WBC franchise belt. Y'all remember that belt? Well, that belt was created because of Canelo Alvarez's request to duck his mandatory Jamal Charlo. And at once
again, Canelo Alvarez had proposed a deal to Jamal Charlo, and Jamal Charlo had refused the fight. So this bullshit about Jamal Charlo being avoided by Canelo Alvarez, all that is horse shit. Jamal Charlo was just a guy that talked a whole lot of shit in his career, and he never did any of the shit that he said he was going to do. He talks all this shit about fighting Andrade or Canelo Alvarez. He never really wanted to fight those guys in the first place. Now, I do think that at one time he wanted to fight Golovkin, but Golovkin wasn't super interested in the fight. But did he really want the Canelo fight like he was letting on? No. Because if he really wanted the Canelo fight, he would have took the deal. And both Charlo brothers, by the way, have stated that Jamal Charlo turned down that deal. But you're not going to hear that shit from AKHi TV.
68, obviously, he ducked the Mexican monster Benavidez and his other mandatory Morel. Lastly, at 175, he ducked Beterbiev, and obviously he's ducking the Bivol rematch.
Right, but come on, Canelo Alvarez is not a guy that belongs there. You know, that's like saying that Floyd Mayweather is avoiding Gennady Golovkin. Like, come on. Or saying, like, you know, he's avoiding someone at a weight class that he really doesn't belong in. And I mean, it'd be different if Canelo Alvarez was super dominant at the 175-pound weight class, but it's obviously just a step too far for him. And understandably so. He's not as big as those guys. He's not really meant to win at the 175-pound weight class. So I can't really go on this tirade of saying that Canelo's avoiding Beterbiev and avoiding Bivol. He's not supposed to be in the ring with those guys in the first place.
That's all Canelo Alvarez is known for.
Like, what that really is was like when Oscar De La Hoya kind of fought like a Bernard Hopkins. That's really what that fight was. Where Bernard Hopkins was about 2 weight classes or 1.5 weight classes bigger than Oscar. Like, that fight never should have happened in the first place.
Is either ducking, cherry picking, losing. The way Canelo became a superstar was him losing to Floyd, believe it or not. Lastly is taking PEDs. This man takes PEDs, gets caught, and still ends up with a draw or robbing his opponent. And
now, once again, for those of you that go that far back, what the LDBC and new media, what they'll do, especially when it's convenient, when they were trying to allege that Gennady Golovkin was the most overrated fighter of all time, because it was Golovkin that was being obtained as one of the greatest fighters of all time and debatably the greatest middleweight fighter of all time, they then used it because Golovkin was enemy number 1. And they stated that, oh, well, Canelo beat you. The first fight was a draw. AKHi TV has been a record of stating multiple times that first fight was a draw, by the way. And then at the second fight that Canelo Alvarez won. Like, that's how much of a snake this guy is. Like, this guy overall, once again, will change his narrative depending on what he needs to use. You can't trust anything that these guys say.
now Canelo found a new angle, which is Jake Paul, the YouTube world. The crazy part about it, he can do that as long as he vacates all of the titles so we can move on. We could care less about Canelo. At this point, he's really a Jake Paul in boxing. That's how we look at him. All of his previous fights for years has been exhibitions, and that's a fact. If he want to do these...
Well, I think that Edgar Berlanga and Jaime Munguia were not the fights that people really wanted to see. But I'm not going to go as far to state that they were exhibition fights. Now, I can kind of understand the Edgar Berlanga fight, but I'm not going to go as far to state that the Jermell Charlo fight and also that the Jaime Munguia fight were exhibition fights. At the end of the day, Jaime Munguia, he's a little bit wild as a fighter. But he was a guy coming in there to where he clearly was bigger than Canelo Alvarez. And he was a guy with some, decent physical talent and some boxing skill. Some very wild and raw boxing skill. But, still a guy that was looked at, as a dangerous contender. Not someone who was A+, but someone that, maybe you could debate as A-. Now, Edgar Berlanga is a guy that's a B-grade level fighter. But Jermell Charlo, remember, these guys kept claiming that Jermell Charlo, was top 5 pound per pound. But then Canelo fought him. And remember, Jermell's not small. Jermell's a guy that's really a middleweight fighter, and so was Canelo Alvarez. Now, of course, Canelo had a little bit of the size advantage, because he moved him up 2 weight classes, and Jermell never fought at 160 or 168 before, but Jermell Charlo's really a middleweight fighter. It is what it is. And then, of course, they just made the size excuse when Canelo whooped his ass. But anyway.
Exhibitions, fine. Just vacate all of the belts so the real fighters can fight for the belts. Don't keep the division hostage. Now, Canelo said he want to fight Jake Paul instead of Benavidez, Crawford, Beterbiev, Bivol rematch, due to the fact he want to revenge Mike Tyson. The funny thing about that is Mike Tyson told Canelo, man, you are shameful to the Mexican culture. You are afraid of Benavidez. You are afraid to lose. Basically, grow some cojones. Mike Tyson even told Canelo, where is your pride? He told...
And listen, once again, Canelo is going to have to deal with that criticism face on. It is what it is. He's going to have to eat that on the chin. But I don't think that Canelo Alvarez really cares for that much longer, because I think that his plan is to basically have Benavidez fight at 175. And if Benavidez ends up getting either his ass kicked against Bivol or Better Beef, Canelo Alvarez can just say, you know, see, he ended up going to a weight class where he was fighting guys his own same size and he ended up getting his ass kicked. So I don't think that Canelo Alvarez really cares that much, at least that much longer, because I think that he realizes that if Benavidez is going to get his ass kicked against Bivol or Better Beef, which I also would predict more than likely would happen, then this isn't really going to last that much longer.
Canelo what Andre told Canelo. Where's your cojones at? Nowhere to be found, that's for sure. Canelo have the audacity to say, yeah, I want to fight Jake because I want to avenge Mike Tyson. If you want to avenge Mike Tyson, then fight the man who Mike Tyson named the Mexican Monster, David Benavidez. And if Canelo won...
And I agree with that. Listen, Canelo Alvarez had the opportunity to fight him at 168 pounds, you know, and he really did not try to attempt to do it. So I do agree with AKHi TV on that point. That being stated, now that David Benavidez is at 175, I don't know if it's really a fight that needs to really happen anymore. I mean, it would still be a very interesting fight, you know, to see, of course. But Benavidez is really more of a natural 175 pounder. And that's pretty much where he belongs. Canelo is at the tail end of his career, and he's a guy that, really, to be honest with you, he's not really even as big as some of the other 168 pounders. Now, the thing is that if you're in that weight class, and if you're going to hold on to the titles, and if you have your mandatories, listen, at the end of the day, you need to fight him. Especially the fight that everyone is calling for. I can somewhat understand not taking the Andrade fight, because Andrade is, you know, in certain, you know, respects, not enough, you know, reward for some of the risks that he puts on the table. But when you talk about Benavidez, he would have been. And it was a fight that all of boxing pretty much was calling for. So Canelo is going to have to deal with that criticism, because he did avoid David Benavidez.
To fight Jake Paul. That's fine. Fight Jake in May. Canelo can get off of the couch and beat Jake Paul. Then fight Terrence Bud Crawford in September.
And apparently that's very possible that's going to happen. But we'll see. But this idiot right here, of course, stated that Jake Paul versus Canelo was official when there was never any official reports from Canelo Alvarez or anything like that. But anyway.
That's the way to do it. If you're going to fight Jake, at the very least, fight both. But it's super embarrassing. I mean,
And AKHi TV is not going to give Canelo any credit for beating Crawford anyway. But I mean, you know, we'll see.
I've never seen a fighter that's more embarrassing than Canelo at this point. He want to fight Jake instead of Crawford. Bivol rematch, Benavidez, and Better Biev. All of these fights are huge mega fights. And Canelo will make a lot.
Right, but once again, Canelo Alvarez does not belong in the ring with guys like Bivol and Better Beef. That's like saying that Crawford needs to get in the ring with guys like a Janabek. It's, listen, dude, they're completely out of their element there. It just is what it is.
The money. The biggest paydays of his career. Turkey just offered it to him to fight Crawford, and he turned it down. That being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts in the comment section below.
But that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. But AKHi TV, of course, being Canelo Alvarez's #1 hater, of course, he cannot help himself to post another video. And listen, I agree with the point that, in my view, that Canelo avoided David Benavidez. But it just shows you how much of a hater this dude is, of how back and forth he goes with some of his narratives, and on top of that, confirming, allegedly, that Canelo versus Jake Paul was about to happen when there was no actual report stating that that fight was officially announced. You know, Eddie Hearn was the only one stating that that fight was pretty much a done deal. You know, but listen, at the end of the day, of course, it ended up not being so. But it is what it is. Anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later. We'll see where this goes.